fact is that you and I are sitting here today because this will be your last week of employment. This is not an assessment of your productivity. You gotta try not to take this personally.
Well, I just had a bad night.
Well, of all the videos poking fun at Joe Biden, that has to be one of the funniest. In real life, George Clooney was one of Biden's biggest fundraisers, but he turned on the president after his terrible live debate with Donald Trump. And now all eyes are on Kamala Harris as she takes Biden's place in the race for the White House.
To MAGA Republicans, Kamala Harris is a vacuous vice president who's obsessed with Venn diagrams.
Of a Venn diagram, I love Venn diagrams. I love Venn diagrams.
And they say, along with Joe Biden, she's failed to protect the country's borders.
Do you have any plans to visit the border?
We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe.
Harris may be a conservative's nightmare, but she's a progressive's dream. Her father was an immigrant from Jamaica who became a Stanford economics professor. Her mother was an Indian immigrant who earned a doctorate at Berkeley. Harris is a trained lawyer who spent 3 decades as a prosecutor in Oakland, California, before being elected district attorney for San Francisco in 2004. In 2011, she became the first Black American, first woman, and first Asian American elected to be the Attorney General of California. She was widely criticized for her tough-on-crime policies, which were seen to adversely affect the Hispanic and Black communities.
She put over 1,500 people in jail. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor.
In 2016, she became a senator for California and made a bid for the White House in 2019, before being picked by Joe Biden as his vice presidential candidate in 2020. As VP, she faced allegations that she bullied staff. It's reported her office has seen such a high turnover of staff that she's struggling to put together an experienced team for her run for the presidency. But as a woman of colour who is almost 20 years younger than Donald Trump, she poses a very different challenge for the Republican candidate, who has been far from complimentary about her in the past.
We take back the White House from crooked Joe Biden and Kamala. I call her Laughing Kamala. You ever watch her laugh? She's crazy. You know, you can tell a lot by a laugh. No, she's crazy. She's nuts.
Harris will run on her record as a prosecutor, compared to Trump's record as a convicted felon.
Fraudsters, cheaters, I know Donald Trump's type. I will proudly put my record against his.
But is that enough to beat him?
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And from left to right, we have Senator Kesha Ram Hinsdale, a Democrat who thinks Kamala Harris will make a great president. Mark Fisher is a Black Lives Matter activist who is rather critical of Harris's record of imprisoning black men. And finally, Janelle King, a Republican commentator who has doubts that Kamala Harris has what it takes to lead. Welcome to the program, everyone. Janelle, if I could start with you. And a new poll suggests that Donald Trump is 2 points behind Kamala Harris, whereas last week he was 2 points ahead of Biden. Do you believe these polls?
I do believe them. Right now, Kamala has all the momentum. She just, snatched this presidency from Joe Biden, and that's exciting. I personally believe that it's going to be black men that's going to decide the election this year. And I think that's an exciting thing. I think black men have been pushed to the side so much and disregarded, particularly by the Democrat Party, that I'm excited to see that they're going to be the ones to decide this. And the reason why is because a lot of women are now backing Kamala. I'm not surprised about that at all. And that's where I think she's getting that bump. President Trump has struggled in that area, but he does have the ability to make up the difference, and he has time to do it.
Kesha, what has Kamala Harris entering the race on behalf of Joe Biden actually done to the Democratic Party? Do they feel re-energized? Do they feel more confident now?
Well, I think this is a moment to ignore the pollsters and just look at the grassroots energy for Vice President Kamala Harris as a candidate. $100 million raised in 24 hours, 28,000 volunteer signups. I had friends in Washington trying to make the case to me about how she could win the convention. And I was saying back to them, Vermont's just ready to get to work. We're ready to go visit Pennsylvania, New Hampshire, and make phone calls. And so I think what we're seeing is that Washington just had its finger to the wind for too long. And the American people want a real candidate, not chaos. And now they're excited to get behind Kamala for that very reason.
Mark, this is what the New York Times is saying today. Black voters feel excited about a Kamala Harris campaign, do they?
No, they do not. And I speak for a majority of Black folks. Let me first say, the Democrats, they play chess. They don't play checkers. If you remember at the debate, the Republican debate, when Vivek Ramaswamy said he wished the Democrats would just be honest and upfront and stop pretending that Joe Biden was going to be the candidate and tell us who it's going to be. Is it going to be Michelle Obama? Is it going to be Gavin Newsom? Is it going to be Kamala Harris? If you pay attention, you can see, the canary in the coal mine was the fact that they were hiding the actual health of Joe Biden from us. He rarely made public appearances. He never spoke to the country, and when he did, it was a disaster. So this is what they do. They're duplicitous. They're hypocrites. They never tell the truth. They lie. They connive. They'll do anything to maintain power. They'll steal. They'll even kill. They'll leave borders unsecure and unopened to replace a whole voting bloc. Whatever it takes to keep power is what the Democrats will do. And I think what they did was completely undemocratic in replacing the duly nominated Democratic nominee for someone else.
We're going to get we're definitely going to explore that issue a little later in the program. But just let's pick up on what Janelle said in her first answer. She said that she thinks it's going to be Black men who decide the election. Can you tell us, how do they feel about Kamala Harris?
Well, I love that about her, but I'm going to say this. I think it's going to actually be Black women again, because I don't know who goes on Twitter, but if you go on Twitter, Black Twitter, you're going to see trending from thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Black women. I am a Black American woman, and I will not be supporting Kamala Harris. That is trending on Twitter right now. So just because you get 40,000 Black women to do a phone call, they don't speak for the majority of Black women. These are AKAs who don't represent Black American women at large. So
really?
These numbers are kind of
Kesha, you want to come in there?
Vermonters aren't big interrupters, but I'll say, the day that Vice President Harris announced she had 44,000 Black women on a call raising $1.5 million, these facts don't lie. Black women are used to saving our democracy. They are not fans of Donald Trump in the biggest numbers in the demographics of the country. And many of them are excited. I just worry when we try to speak for an entire community or population, because Kamala Harris is also more complicated than that. The American story is more complicated than that. She is building a coalition that's much bigger than race or geography or generation. A lot of people are excited of all backgrounds.
Janelle, just close this point out for me.
Yeah, I agree with Mark 1,000%. There is a distinct difference between the 44,000 Black women that was on that video and then the Black women as a whole. To Kesha's point, there is a collective that we have to pay attention to. But let's be clear, Kamala is interesting and she is unique. And the fact is she's Indian and she's Caribbean. And a lot of Black American women are not seeing her as someone who represents us. And I do think that there is going to be a unique conversation that's going to happen around this, because we got to remember when she ran for president the first time, she pulled in 2%. And that was during the time when everyone wanted to have Black representation. So the fact that she couldn't pull in anyone when she ran for president, to pull her in right now looks like a plot, like a ploy to try to take some of that money that Biden raised and shift it over to her. But we're watching it on the Republican side. So any of those shenanigans go on, we're going to call it out.
Kesha, that's a great point. Back in 2020, when she was running to be the Democratic nominee, she fared terribly. Why do you think she'll do any better this time round?
Well, first of all, Barack Obama came out of nowhere with a father from Kenya and a mother from Kansas in 2008. And we can do this again. I really think we listen way too much to the polls. And the polls are often a reflection of the despair that American people feel about politics in general. And now what you're seeing are the polls reflect excitement that anything is possible. It reminds me of that 2008 feeling when I became one of the youngest legislators in the country and Barack Obama became the president of the United States. People want to feel hopeful again, and they certainly haven't for over a decade. So I think this is a very exciting time for an Indo-Caribbean candidate, just like President Obama was accused of not being black enough. He still represents
not Black American.
Mark, why does that make a difference?
It makes a huge difference, and thank you for asking me, because what we want to highlight is that, and we learned a major lesson from Barack Obama, whose mother was white and father was African and raised in Hawaii. How can you possibly relate to somebody who was raised in New York City or Atlanta, Georgia, or Los Angeles, California, that identifies as a Black American? And it's the same thing with Kamala Harris. How can somebody whose mother is Indian, whose father is Indian, and was born in Jamaica be considered a Black American? It just doesn't even jive. And they're trying to force her on us. They're trying to make us make her Black American because they understand that identity politics is what keeps the Democrats in power, by emotionally manipulating Black American people by putting a Black face in office. These are not leaders. Black celebrities are not Black leaders.
Mark, that's an interesting point. And what you're saying is the comparison between Kamala Harris and the African-American community is a purely superficial one. Let me just point to another poll, because we want to be fair, that earlier in the week, Atlanta Journal-Constitution poll said that Trump was leading Harris by about 5 percentage points. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to Kamala Harris's record when she was the prosecutor in California. Mark, I know this is very important to you. Tell us why you are fearful of her presidency based on her time as a prosecutor in California.
Because she's a merciless prosecutor who prefers judgment over mercy. And to me, she doesn't have discretion when she talks about locking up people for smoking marijuana and then laughs about it, that she smoked and got high off the contact at the Breakfast Club. That shows you how serious that she takes an issue like locking up families. She locked up parents for truancy, and I laughed about it. I mean, when you talk about locking up parents, and I understand you want your children in school, that's a problem in itself. But locking up their parents for not being in school, that exacerbates the problem. That in no way solves or mitigates the problem. And then to laugh about it so casually, locked up parents too, for their kids being truant. Like, that's what we're dealing with here.
Let me put these points to Kesha. Kesha, back in 2020 during the primaries, it was Tulsi Gabbard who famously confronted her on her record, and she pointed out 3 things. Firstly, that she imprisoned 1,500 people for marijuana possession, and that she blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to release it. And finally, that she kept people in prison beyond their sentences just to get cheap or free labor for the state of California. These things alone sound awful. Kesha, is there any context you could put around that would mitigate that for her?
Well, Indians have a saying that trying to lead a big country or a big state like California is like being a mouse riding an elephant. I grew up in California as well. I was arrested by the LAPD when I was 13 years old and profiled as Mexican. That system, I will not disagree, is a completely broken system. I think Mark and I can agree there. Can one person, move that elephant enough to bring justice to the largest state in the country? Not quickly and not easily, but she won enough of a support of a coalition of both victims and those caught up and victimized by the criminal justice system to be elected to the U.S. Senate from the state. So, that's doing the best you can in a state that has a very complicated relationship.
Fair enough. Can we just pause for a second to take a look at how Biden dropped out of the race on Sunday? Here's a quick report on how he finally succumbed to all the pressure from within his party.
Biden has known these people for years, his great allies, supporters, in some cases friends. But this is politics. Survival is the name of the game, and Biden was no longer cutting it.
With dealing with everything we have to do with,
And now I want to hand it over to the President of Ukraine, ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Some of his old Democrat allies were very emotional at his demise.
Joe Biden is grounded. He's grounded in his faith, in his family, and in our state. Excuse me.
It was the disastrous debate against Trump that really saw Democrats start to turn on the president in both public and private. Obama tweeted it was a bad night. Obama's friend, George Clooney, went further.
Clooney said the president, quote, wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020. He was the same man we all witnessed at the debate.
Hollywood star Clooney was an ally for Biden and the celebrity face of fundraising efforts. Yet Clooney's open letter to the New York Times was one of the first high-profile calls for Biden to go. But the real campaign happened behind the scenes. The key players tend to work in the shadows. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer never went public, but he reportedly visited Biden at his home in Delaware to let him know where the party stood.
Democratic leader Chuck Schumer told President Biden it would be better for the country if he ends his re-election campaign.
House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries also held secret meetings with the president to tell him the same thing. But the big mover behind the scenes was Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi.
We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
Although she was clear what that decision had to be, Pelosi was worried that the Democrats' donations were drying up, for good reason.
Big Democratic donors have said enough's enough.
Jeffrey Katzenberg before had been sort of the hero of fundraising who had raised all of this money for Joe Biden, just telling the president the spigots run dry.
Like George Clooney, Biden's big donors were alarmed by his debate performance and threatened to withhold their donations unless Biden stepped down. It was compared by some to a soft coup.
They call it the democratic process, but it feels like an American version of a coup.
The events of the last few days, I have a resemblance to a coup that was engineered by special interest donors and also certain party leaders.
Also behind the scenes are the big political beasts that still wield considerable power. Biden was VP under former President Barack Obama, but as the pressure built, Obama's continued backing became conspicuous by its absence, while Obama's old allies like his former senior advisor David Axelrod put the boot in.
What he's done as president in many ways has been historic, but that doesn't address his ability to do this for another 4 years, and he seems unable to address that.
Bill and Hillary Clinton appeared to use similar tactics, remaining silent but sending out allies as political attack dogs. They broke their silence to jump on the Kamala Harris bandwagon within hours of Biden endorsing her as his replacement. Anonymous sources tell the media that Biden made his final decision when aides came to him with new polls that suggested he couldn't win.
New internal polling done by the Biden campaign, which showed that Joe Biden's path to victory was, quote, gone.
But did Biden really jump, or was he pushed?
Back to our panel now. Janelle, did he jump, or was he pushed?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think he was pushed out by donors who said that he did not want to invest in a losing candidate. And I think that he jumped because polling showed that he couldn't win.
Interesting. Kesha?
So our U.S. Senator Peter Welch was the first sitting U.S. Senator to call for President Biden to step out of the race. And he did not endorse Kamala Harris right away. He wanted to see what the people had to say, but he was, learning from folks that they wanted to see a different candidate. Time was really not on our side as Democrats to make this decision. The convention is in 2 weeks. COVID, made people question President Biden's ability to keep going, and what would happen if the worst of the worst happened and we lost him completely. So, this was a moment where Democrats had to make a decision. It was forced on them, and it created an opening in history like we've never seen before.
Mark, you think this was a soft coup?
Absolutely. This man who 24 hours after saying he was never going to remove himself, all of a sudden decides to step down. That's a coup. And they put so much pressure on him, all the leaders in the Democratic Party, to undemocratically remove this man who was duly nominated as the candidate. That's a coup.
That's a good point, Janelle. Millions of Americans voted for Joe Biden in the primaries, and they ended up with Kamala Harris. Is that democratic?
Well, I mean, it's a Democratic Party for sure. It doesn't matter what the voters think when it comes to the Democrat Party. I mean, we saw that all across the United States. Right here in Georgia, we saw Nikema Williams kind of hijack Congressman John Lewis's seat. We see Bernie Sanders sitting in the Senate because he couldn't be president because they cheated to help Hillary Clinton in his race. It just goes on and on and on. I mean, this is like the method of the Democrat Party. They pretend to be about democracy. They forget that the United States is a republic, and then they make decisions for their voters. So if you're a Democrat and you're okay with that, fine. But if you're not, it's time to look at other parties.
So, Kesha, it looks like in a couple of weeks' time, she will be formally nominated, but there's still that possibility of another twist. Maybe Gavin Newsom coming in, someone else, perhaps?
You see most of the other people considered as candidates, vying to be the vice presidential candidate, which is also very exciting for Democrats. And what we've seen in our state is a grassroots pledge from our delegates to support Kamala Harris because they are excited to have a history-making, barrier-breaking candidate. Make no mistake, American people who don't identify as Republicans or Democrats are excited about Kamala Harris. We can't say the same for convicted felon Donald Trump.
Just one thing, Kesha. People voted for those delegates to support Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris. Shouldn't you guys have an open convention in August and put a few people forward to see who wins?
This is almost an unprecedented moment, and I think what you see is great excitement to settle on a candidate and celebrate and unify at that convention. So, no, I don't think you see anyone else coming forward. I think you see candidates, delegates actually organically pledging their support to Kamala. She's earned that support democratically. And that's what happens in a party process. Otherwise, we'd have a hodgepodge of candidates on the ballot in November, and no Democrat wants that.
Okay, just a final thought from you, Mark. You'll notice how Kesha managed to slip in there that Trump is a convicted felon. Does that make a difference in his electability?
No, not when the president of the United States is the one weaponizing the Department of Justice against his political opponent, and for the same crimes that his child is guilty of, even worse crimes. Like, there's no victims in these crimes, that these 91 felonies that they're trying to charge Trump with.
Mark Fisher, Janelle King, and Kesha, thank you all very much for your contributions to Nexus today. Much appreciated. So, Kamala Harris goes up against Donald Trump. He's just accepted his party's nomination at the Republican National Convention last week, which was just a few days after the attempt on his life. Well, a pretty amazing evening by all accounts, and our next guest, Nick Adams, was there. Nick, you had a chance just before he formally accepted the nomination to grab a photograph with him, and you spoke to your political hero. Was he in good form?
Matthew, thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you. Yes, President Trump was in fine form. He was as strong as ever. His resilience, his determination was showing both in what he said as well as his whole posture.
Did he seem in any way shaken by what had happened just a couple of days before?
I wouldn't say shaken. I would say perhaps he was slightly more subdued than usual. I think probably taking in everything that had happened. Of course, this was also the culmination, Matthew, when I was lining up and getting my photograph, and he was about to give his speech. So he had a lot on his mind, but he was possibly a little bit more subdued than usual. But other than that, he seemed to be the Donald J. Trump that we all know and love.
But he's becoming perhaps more responsible, more sensitive. I mean, he said he had a barnstorming speech against Joe Biden, which he tore up, and chose instead to focus on unity.
Look, I think President Trump really met the moment. I think what we saw just a few days before his nomination speech, and just hours really before the RNC convention began, was something historic. Those images that emerged following that failed assassination attempt, Matthew, will live on in history, no doubt. Iconic photography. And I think the president realized what had happened. He realized what the nation needed. And
Right.
like he always has, he stepped up and he delivered for the American people.
Two more
I
quick-
thought his convention speech was fantastic.
2 more quick questions for you. You've got J.D. Vance on the other side of you. Are you impressed with that pick? How was he in real life?
I am impressed with that pick, Matthew. Look, Senator Vance is an impressive young man. He's only born actually a couple of weeks before me. We're the same age. So it's remarkable that a person so young has achieved so much. He's very articulate. He's very friendly. And I think he's going to be a wonderful complement to President Trump and his goals.
And just finally, we've been talking about Kamala Harris this week. Do you think that Trump ought to be a little bit wary of her? She's certainly more on the ball than Joe Biden.
Well, she doesn't have dementia, Matthew, but there's a lot of other problems that she's got. And they include the fact that she is another San Francisco liberal. She is soft on crime. She is weak on the border. All of the policy failures of the Biden administration, which people were so upset about and made Joe Biden so incredibly unpopular, she owns, she belongs to. So, in fact, if anything, I think that President Trump would prefer to be matched up against Kamala Harris than Joe Biden.
Nick Adams, Joe Biden has not been formally diagnosed with dementia, but thank you for your analysis. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus, TRT World. Until next week, then, goodbye.